So we get Outdoors Nation. Today we are joined by somebody who I think is an incredible human being. Some people love to jump off things, jump out of things, go down things, and other people have an obsession with going upwards. And this guy has an obsession with going upwards. I checked out his bio. He's done lots of cool shit going upwards, but I'll let him tell you about that because today we're joined by a master mountaineer, Mr. Graham Zimmerman. Graham, welcome to the podcast.
I am delighted to be here. Thank you for having me. I love to jump on and chat about climbing and how it intersects with everything else we do. Where do we want to start?
Wow, Graham, what should people know about you who haven't heard about you already?
Well, gosh, where to start? So I live in Bend, Oregon. I am 34 years old, and I wear a whole variety of different hats professionally. One of them is I am a professional alpinist or mountain climber. I also run a film production company. I sit on a variety of nonprofit boards, and then I work as the kind of team captain of the Protect Our Winters climb program, which is Protect Our Winters being a nonprofit here in the United States that works in climate change advocacy. But I think that the easiest place to start is with climbing, because climbing is the thread that goes through everything for me. And so as a climber, my primary focus is big mountains in the big wild parts of the world. A lot of my focus recently has been on the Pakistani Karakoram. That's where K2 is. And there are many peaks there that are very steep and very technical and very tall and are either unclimbed or have unclimbed routes available on them. And that's really what I've been focused on for, quite a few years now. And kind of note, in 2019, we made the first descent of a peak called Linksar. This is me, three of my climbing partners, Chris Wright, Steve Swenson, and Mark Ritchie. And it was a culmination of a lot of effort. And it was really, really cool that we were awarded the gold medal of alpinism for that climb.
That's incredible.
That was pretty neat. And I guess it's a bit of, kind of helps is a way for me to say that I guess at least somebody thinks I'm pretty good at this. But it's a lot of what I do is try to live a balanced life between going and trying to do these big mountain climbs that require a lot of fitness, require a lot of planning, require a lot of time away, but also trying to balance that with all these other things that I do in terms of climate advocacy, in terms of content creation, and then being a good husband, being a good dog owner, making sure that the house doesn't fall down, all that kind of, sort of normal stuff that is foundational to everything else that I do.
Grown-upping, that's what we call it, grown-upping.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. That is it. And you know what? We spent a lot of time complaining about that stuff, but man, I don't really mind it. And it's that's kind of crafting that foundation on which we can do everything else that we want to do. So I think that really making sure that kind of thing gets the attention that it requires, is really what allows for me to do all this other stuff. And, I, kind of as a data point, when I was younger, I lived in a car and did the vagabond climbing thing and really didn't have very strong foundations, didn't have a home, basically had a storage unit and a rig, and I was working in geophysics, so I made some money. But as I have developed more of a foundation in my life in terms of relationships and geographic foundations and that kind of thing, it has just given me more empowerment for doing these bigger things. It allows me to have a more dedicated training schedule, a more kind of more clarity in terms of how these things can interface with potential sponsors, and just more foundation which for planned kind of bigger, more ambitious objectives. And it's gone pretty well.
So I've spent quite a lot of time in the Himalaya over the years,
cool.
mostly whitewater kayaking, if just to fill you in on that. So I know the Karakoram, I know the Pakistan and the Nepalese side quite well. And it would strike me that the easy pickings are all gone. Whether you want to go down a whitewater river or go up a mountain, the stuff that you can just, I mean, when I first went to the Himalayas in 97, you could do a first descent by throwing your kayak on the top of a bus and just driving somewhere going, oh, look, river. And off you go down it. And it's the first descent, go me. And I then went back in about 2010 and suddenly you're like, holy shit, I have to hike for how many days to get there and this much shit to take with me and so on and so forth. And so you must be like a Pakistani logistics guru at this point in time.
Oh, I mean, I certainly spend a lot of time thinking about it. And, you know, an interesting thing in Pakistan is that the geopolitical conflicts over there, primarily between Pakistan and India, have kind of created these areas that have, you know, due to that conflict, been restricted for foreigners accessing them for many, many years. And it means that if you can really plug into what's going on over there in terms of that conflict calming down and the areas that are opening up and kind of be on the forefront of that, there are a lot of opportunities. So it's like pretty, there's a, you know, as we kind of look at conflicts in mountain regions, you know, climbers are oftentimes some of the first folks to go in to those areas, and it's because that's kind of where a lot of these gems lie, and it's pretty kind of a cool outcome of like peace prevailing in some of these areas, and development of recreational opportunities.
It's amazing for all of the doom and gloom that we hear on the news. Doesn't matter which news platform you look at. I've got friends who in 2019 were leading expeditions paying clients into Afghanistan. And I was like, you're taking paying people where? And then they had that conversation of, Rob, you do know that your geography is crap and that it's a bigger place than you could realize. And actually, there's some pretty cool, quiet places as well to go.
Yeah, the Wakhan corridor is a lot different than Kabul or Fallujah or whatever. Yeah.
So how do you go about choosing these new peaks to climb, new routes to climb? Is it like you spy something on one trip and you're like 2 years time, or is it Google Earth, or what's the process you go through?
It's a really good question. And I think for me, you know, it's kind of all of the above when it comes down to it. But the most important component to all of this is relationship with space. And for me, if you look at my climbing career, there haven't been very many trips where they've been kind of like one-offs. I've spent a lot of time in the Alaska range. I've spent quite a bit of time in Patagonia. I've spent a lot of time in Pakistan. And you see some folks who it's like, you know, they kind of try to go everywhere, but I try to really zero in on a few different places. And that allows me to understand, you know, not only what the next objective might be. You know, if we look at Linksar, for example, we actually saw Linksar from another first descent we made back in 2015, a peak called Changi Tower, kind of a Trango Tower, kind of big granite wedge that we made the first descent of. That was 6,500 meters tall, and we were looking from that down into the Kondis Valley, and there's Linksar, and Linksar was something I'd heard of, and you know, it's kind of, there's that kind of like oh, there's the next thing, and the next thing we're gonna go try, which won't tell you the name of, but it's something we saw from that last trip, and so that's, you know, that's that. There's kind of that like specific of objective, but there's also just understanding the logistics, understanding the conditions, understanding what your expectations should be around, you know, what the climbing or whatever that kind of thing you're going to get at is going to be like. Climbing in the Alaska range is very different from climbing in the Karakoram. They're both very different from Patagonia, as well as climbing in the Northern Andes or climbing in like the Himalaya of Nepal. And you know, as you form more of a relationship with these spaces, you understand both how to be successful, but also more importantly, how to be safe and how to avoid hazard. And that's, our primary goal here is to go climbing more. And to do that, we have to survive. And to do that, we have to make good decisions. And to make good decisions, we need information. And so by spending more time in a place, we have more information and therefore are able to, keep doing it.
That's great. So I suppose you're thinking in that training leading up to going somewhere is, what's the temperature going to be like? What's the blend of rock, snow, ice going to be like? How much kit do you have to take with you? I mean, are you hauling hundreds of kilos up these faces with you, or are you going light and fast, or what's the strategy you've preferred?
No, we tend to bring a whole bunch of stuff to base camp. And, that's because we're going to be spending months in base camp. So you want to have, your camera with all your lenses, and you want to have a computer to back up your data, and you want to have some books to read and, some sweatpants to wear. But once we actually get on the climb itself, as we look at the kind of progression of modern climbing, we've moved more and more towards a light and fast by fair means style of alpine climbing. And what that really means is not fixing a whole bunch of ropes and making it so that we kind of beat down the mountain into submission and make it as easy to climb as possible. Instead, we're trying to get at kind of by fair means with a small team, with the gear on our backs, and the ropes that are tied between us, and getting up and down the mountain that way. And it's interesting. I mean, it makes it a far more athletic endeavor. It requires a much more kind of precise understanding of what you're getting into. It requires all team members to be very talented. You can't be like, oh, we have this one person who's kind of going to drag everybody else up there. It doesn't really work. And it's just, kind of in the words of, some of the folks who have kind of defined this style of climbing, the more simple the experience, the more rich it becomes. And instead of kind of being up on Everest with like clipped to a line, waiting in line to go to the top, we're out there on our own in these amazing, vast geographies, trying really hard and having to pay very close attention to the weather and conditions and how we feel and our health and all that stuff. And it's magical.
It's incredible. I always, on my bucket list when I was a kid, I had kayak the Grand Canyon and climb Everest. And I can honestly tell you couldn't pay me to climb Everest just because of the standing on clipped onto a rope, waiting, shivering, freezing your ass off with not much air for a long time. It has no appeal to it anymore.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, like climbing Everest without oxygen is for sure physiologically challenging. But man, it is not somewhere I want to be. Maybe if we could have gotten a permit to go this year when there was like nobody there, that would have been pretty cool. But that's not an opportunity I see showing up in my in my to-dos.
Unless you can just go to China, set off your own pandemic, and then just quickly go and hide in somewhere in Nepal until it all kicks off, and then you just get it all to yourself for a while.
Yeah, that's that could work. But I mean, that does drive us towards a very interesting part of this conversation of what is the impact of what you're doing out there, which is something very important to consider. And I would argue that based on that strategy, your impact would be pretty negative.
Selfishly achieve your quiet objective while screwing up the rest of the world at the same time.
Yeah.
And is that part of your sort of go light, go fast, sort of modern alpinism approach? Is that geared towards minimizing impact at the same time? The sort of adopting. I mean, the earlier alpinists certainly weren't leave no trace dudes. They left ropes. They drilled holes in things. They left a lot of shit behind.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, when we look at the impacts that come from climbing, certainly fast and light alpinism, that kind of modern style, has a much lighter touch. In terms of those, like you brought up LNT, leave no trace standards and things like that. and that's really important, and that is certainly an important component. And then, as we look kind of beyond that, something that I really work on is ways that these stories from climbing, which is inherently a very selfish pursuit, ways that those can be utilized in order to drive inspiration and drive change in our broader communities. And that's something I've really been focused on for, I don't know, the last like five years or so, kind of as I've kind of like become more of a, not a high profile athlete, but medium profile athlete. And there have been some opportunities to go to DC to lobby. I do a lot of work in climate change, kind of utilizing the platform developed from climbing in order to drive change. And then I try to really keep the messaging that I utilize for climbing broad enough that, it's really crafting inspiration for anybody who wants to pursue something. It doesn't matter if it's climbing, it could be gymnastics, or it could be mathematics, or it could be trail running, or whatever, just like, just kind of trying to demonstrate that if you dedicate yourself towards something and look at it holistically and build it into your lifestyle so that you can do it for a long period of time, that you can do things that, whether you're talking about the gold medal, or you're talking about, just really feeling good about something you've executed on, that you can do it. It's possible. And it's something that, we should all be trying to achieve, being our best selves, whatever we kind of determine that best potential self to be.
And it's hard, isn't it, to balance that carbon impact that we have. I think about myself. I often used to talk about miles driven or miles flown versus miles kayaked. And I'm not going to do the math because I'll upset myself quite quickly. But I don't know. I fly from, I used to live in the UK, so I fly from London to Uganda in Central Africa to kayak for 2 weeks. And it's selfish in many respects, unless you do something to give back, to actually say, I'm going to try and offset this abuse that I do to pursue a hedonistic hobby. It's quite a conflicted place to be, yet you still want to go and show people, A, your talents, and B, that amazing stuff done for the first time is still possible today. How do you manage that for yourself?
Well, so when we go to Pakistan, when we go to the Karakoram, we're investing a lot of time, we're investing a lot of energy, and we're investing a lot of burned carbon, right? And that's something that I try to be very clear with myself about, and I calculate that carbon, I offset that carbon, and carbon offsets are something that are not a solution to climate change. They're a stepping stone, so we have to go beyond that. And for me personally, I've worked with Protect Our Winters a lot to look at the relative carbon burned between like coal power plants and expeditions. And I am going to get these numbers a little bit wrong. I should have looked them up beforehand, but for our Pakistan expedition, for 4 of us going to the Karakoram for 3 months to climb Link Star in 2019, our total carbon burned was around 24 metric tons, which sounds like a lot. And if we compare that to the average of like the top 10 coal burning power plants in the United States, that's more like, I want to say it's 64 million tons. We should fact check that. But regardless, the Pakistan expedition is not even a rounding error in the amount of carbon that's being produced to pump electricity into the grid in the United States. And so if I can go on this Pakistan trip, because of that, craft a platform for myself, and then utilize that to drive systemic change in in the U.S. government that leads towards initiatives that drive us towards a green energy economy, putting a tax on carbon, investing in things like electronic vehicle infrastructure, then there can be a massive net positive there. And that's something that I've been really, really focused on, is finding that chain so that I can be crafting that change. And then additionally working with other athletes kind of in a mentorship role of how they can do that. And because, athletes have platforms, athletes inspire people. And, if we look at like Colin Kaepernick, the football player who's taken a knee, he's like created far more change, far more conversation, far more thought with that action than with his football playing or gridiron or whatever. And that's like that model is pretty exciting.
Yeah, because we have to, I suppose, accept the fact that we can't not do any harm. Just lighting your log burning stove in your house and throwing wood in there is chucking carbony stuff out the chimney. Right? So we can't not do any harm. I think it's about that consciousness of how little damage or harm can I do, and then how can I then offset that against, as you say, being a spokesman, being a role model, using the platform you've got to get people to make better choices for themselves, so on and so forth. It's I follow Greta Thunberg quite closely in what she does, and she gets a lot of bashing. But I'm like, actually, no, she's kind of doing as little harm as possible and trying to get a message out there to a group of people who normally wouldn't listen. I have to respect that.
Oh yeah, Greta's badass. Yeah, I mean that's it. And it's the thing is with being a climbing athlete, like I am an imperfect advocate, right? But there's really no such thing as a perfect advocate. And if we try to achieve that, if I was at home and didn't use electricity and wasn't connected to the internet and just lived off of vegetables in my backyard and heated my house with solar or whatever, I mean, it sounds pretty nice, but I would not be a very effective advocate. So that's the kind of balance you need to strike. And, in a world where we all are imperfect when it comes to carbon emissions and when it comes to climate change, our only choice is to engage with imperfect advocacy. And it's a pretty binary decision, because the other choice is to just sit back and watch the world burn. And I don't personally think that's acceptable.
So I agree with you completely. It's actually the reason why we started We Get Outdoors, but we'll talk more about that later. But what differences? So most people live in an urban environment. They don't go that far. However, for those of us who are fortunate enough to go to the Arctic Circle or go to super high mountains places, we get to notice things that this year looks and measures temperature-wise different to last year. Like you actually get to see a glacier that's just half of it's evaporated. What are you noticing in the big peaks of the world at the moment, the impact of climate change to be?
It's a great question. And so, kind of, I don't know, I have kind of a murky past of various jobs and educations and things like that. But when I went to university down in New Zealand, I'm actually from New Zealand originally, not that you would know from my accent. I moved to the States when I was 5 and then moved back when I was 18. And have retained the Yankee Doodle dandy accent. But I studied glacial hydrology down there. So when we go look at the high altitude and high latitude parts of our world, those are the areas that are most dramatically being affected by climate change. And it's showing up in a lot of ways, both geographical and ecological. But the easiest one to get at is glacial recession. These big rivers of ice that, due to the fact that that they move so slowly, that they form slowly, and that they have so much thermal mass, they respond to long-term climate changes in a way that a few other things too. And so, it's when we talk about climate change, there's a difference between climate, which is kind of overarching changes or over the overarching trend of what's going on with, heat and water and those things kind of moving through our atmosphere. And then we have weather, which is shorter duration. Is it raining? Is it a nice day? Is it a nice week? Versus like, what is the climate like this decade? And so, it's when we look at rain gauges and things like that, it's really kind of, it can be hard to kind of differentiate between weather and climate. And whereas with glaciers, like they're affected by climate. Changes in glacial growth, glacial mass balance, glacial recession, that is a very clear demonstration of climate. And when we look at places like the Andes, when we look at places like the Karakoram or the Himalaya, when we look at Antarctica or Greenland, it's like climate change is obvious. There's no like, oh, maybe this isn't happening. It's like, oh boy, this is definitely happening. And when we correlate that to carbon emissions from our species, it's very, very clear that it's us that's causing it. It's something.
There is a direct correlation, isn't there? You can track the carbon being shoved into the atmosphere from humans, from consumption, and then you can also track the glacier moving back X amount of meters per year or centimeters per year as the carbon increases. It's the two are linked.
Yeah, they are very well correlated. Science shows very clearly that's the case, and they're, and to be honest, like that was something that people were trying to argue about 10 years ago. But they're
just
really
give
not
up. Don't argue.
Yeah, and if you look at, I won't get too political, but if you look at certain leaders in this country, people are just kind of making shit up at this point. But it's something we're working on.
So I'm here in Johannesburg, South Africa. So we're somewhere between 4,500 and 5,000 feet above sea level. And I talked to my wife's parents and my wife's grandparents about how was South Africa in their childhood. And they talk about 45 minutes of rain at pretty much exactly 5 p.m. every day of the week for 9 months of the year. 6 out of 7 days of the week for 9 months of the year. And you could my mother-in-law talks about getting off when she was 19, having her first job, and she's getting the bus back home. And like she got off the bus back home and there was no way of her walking the kilometer back to her front door without getting soaked every single day because the rain and the weather was that consistent. And now we get rains consistently at 5 o'clock in the morning, 12 hours later. And I know it's only anecdotal, but when enough people say the same thing about the same time and over the same length of time as well, because we're talking sort of a 60, 70 year window they're talking about with grandparents and parents. And then here we are. And they all say, oh, we can light, in South African terms, the braai, but the barbecue. They'll say, oh, we can have a braai tonight, but we couldn't do that when we were a kid because we'd light it and it would get put out by the rain. And that's their overriding memory. And here we are in 2021, and they're like, oh, now we can have a braai or a barbecue this evening. I don't think we can dismiss that as bullshit.
No. Oh, absolutely not. I think that, listening to our elders, listening to, kind of an extension of that would be indigenous communities who have spent a lot more time on this land than we have, is a very important part of this conversation, and having respect for their memory. And, it's something that we look at in terms of like storytelling around that in the United States is like ice fishing in New England. So New England's that kind of northeast corner of the United States where all the little teeny states are there below Maine. And you can see how those lakes up there have the kind of the line at which they've been fishable for ice fishing, which requires you to walk out onto the ice, and has like, long-term cold weather. That line traveling north, since people can remember, due to the fact that the climate is warming, and looking for those things that are very deeply tied to our day-to-day experience, things that are tangible, is a really important part of the kind of climate conversation, I think, because that's, we get so augured into the here and now, and what's going on just outside my door, and so finding those kind of reference points is something really important, both in terms of proof that this is something we need to think about, but also in terms of solutions. And that's, and this is very kind of like United States focused, but we're like, I'm doing a lot of work here in Bend, where I live, in Central Oregon, on like our climate action plan for the city, and then working on state level policy for curbing climate change. And it's because, this is a place where I live. This is where my stories reside, and I share stories and geography with others. And so kind of looking for that common ground so that we can be working together to be moving forward on this. And then, and then pushing that towards a federal and global level, so that we can kind of have federal common ground, so we can have global common ground. And from that, we can drive federal and global action on this stuff.
It was interesting. I listened to an interview with Elon Musk a few years ago, and I honestly can't find it now. And he said, and a bit like your figures, these are a bit of a thumb suck, but I remember one number in there. And he said, if every vehicle that consumes petrol or diesel on planet Earth drives 10 miles less a month, like the impact, we could push back the like day zero of climate change, where we all just burn to hell pretty much. We could push it back by something like 10 to 15 years if we every vehicle just drove 10 miles a month less. And I think that when we talk about this topic, people feel like they're going to have to sacrifice their entire being to go and change this. And actually, yes, there is a degree of that, but actually it's small, practical, thoughtful little things that if everybody does them in simultaneously, in unison, actually can have profound impacts. And I think often we overthink this stuff. It could just be turning all the lights off in your home and driving 10 miles a month less and not using plastic bags. Like that could be, if everybody chose to do that, I don't know what impact would come, but I think it would be pretty profound.
Yeah. And I don't know. We've kind of been sold the idea that it's us, that it is me that needs to change, and not the system that is, the thing that's making Fortune 500 executives boatloads of money. And when we talk about systemic change, like, yes, we should live introspective lives. We should understand our personal carbon footprints the same way that, for the same reasons that we should, treat others the way that we want to be treated, and all of that, the same way that I should understand how much is my bank account and, make sure that I can afford that latte or whatever. But the thing that we're finding more and more is that the way that we drive a lot of this change, and this high level change that needs to take place, is actually for us to put in systemic regulations and systemic incentivizations. And in the United States, we do that by calling our representatives and voting, and really getting in the habit of engaging with democracy. Because it's hypothetically, we live in a democracy here, and we the people should be able to change this kind of stuff. And that is a muscle that if we don't flex will go away. And so something that I think we do need to flex. And I think that climate and its intersection with diversity, equity, and inclusion, and social justice, because that's a very important part of this, is something we should be calling our reps about. And I'll tell you what, I called my rep this morning. And I do it a lot, and thanks. It's easy. It took 5 minutes. I did it while I drank my second coffee.
Good job. I actually fell out with somebody a couple of weeks ago who was bitching and whining about all sorts of stuff and saying it's systemic and it's the politics and it's this. And I asked them, this is in South Africa, where I'm not allowed to be part of politics because I'm not a citizen here. And I said, sir, have you joined a political party, and are you influencing the direction of that political party? And they, oh, no, I don't have the time. And I was like, well, maybe you don't have the right to bitch and whine at the same time then, because if you're not prepared to go and do something simple, and as you said, 5 minutes to call a representative, that doesn't take much. Like if we're not prepared to take simple, pragmatic, practical action, we're pretty screwed, to be honest.
Oh man, I'm not gonna disagree with you. I think if you want to bitch and whine, then you better be acting. Otherwise, you are not helping anybody.
That's it. I'm always also the opinion, like even protesting, I'm not even too sure. Protesting polarizes. You know, if your representative gets bombarded with phone calls by the concerned electorate to the point that their phone never stops ringing and they have to employ more people to deal with those calls, you're actually going to affect real change at that level. All we do when we protest often is we piss off the people who don't agree with us and actually cause, it's almost deviousness in the way. We should almost be celebrating if a representative has to employ more people to deal with calls. We should say, yes, we've won.
I agree. And the other thing is that I think that once you dig in and you start realizing that there are a lot of people doing this work, you realize that there are a lot of really interesting initiatives and organizations that are getting involved and are doing good work, and what they need is more people to be calling reps, to be getting involved, to be donating their time, donating their money and things like that. You realize that if you stop whining and you start acting, you'll find that there are other people that are acting, and it turns into a pretty positive space. I would much rather sit here and talk about what we can be doing and talk about like where we can go forward and look to the future and what we can do to live, to move not towards the past, but towards the future that we want to live in. And that's fun. And it's way more fun than sitting around and bitching and whining. And something that I talk about a lot is that, like, our goal is not to stop driving. Our goal is not to give up our iPhones. Our goal is not to stop doing the things that we love, to stop climbing. Our goal is to move into a future where, like, I can pull out of my driveway with my electric vehicle that has been plugged into my house, that is running on a green renewable grid, and I can drive to the Canadian Rockies with one one extended stop for coffee along the way to recharge my car, also on our green renewable grid, pass over the border efficiently, go climb ice in Canada, have a great time, still be charging on a renewable grid, drive home, plug back in, and be doing those things I love, but be doing so, in a carbon neutral or carbon efficient way. And we have the technology. I mean, it's not even like, can we do it? It's just like, let's do it. And because the question that gets me fired up, man.
The question of the 1980s was that it was just Star Wars and George Orwell who had the idea of what we could do. And as we both know, that's no longer a question. That shit's there. We can actually do it, use it. We just need more people to do it and use it for it to become more affordable and more available to everybody.
Yeah, man. It's like electric cars are available. We drive two hybrids, which is stepping stone technology, but is moving us in the right direction. It's, if we look at, how efficient our homes are and things like that, this stuff is all very possible. We just need to kind of flex our collective muscles to make sure that we put it in place and we build the infrastructure we need to make it happen. And it's exciting times in the States. I mean, the Biden administration is talking about putting a lot of money towards green energy infrastructure. And you know what? That probably won't happen if we don't call our reps and, let it be known that, like, that shit matters a lot to us. And so that's, we gotta keep it up.
Well, that's it. Like this, the secret of politics is to let the politicians know how to get reelected. and then you focus their mind on let's be honest, their number one priority is to stay in a job. So if you say, hey, you can stay in a job if you choose to do X, Y, and Z, the likelihood of them doing it, it's a bit like when I had a boss, if my boss said, you're going to get fired unless, I'd be quite sure to deal with unless properly. And we've got that power.
We do. It's how the system's supposed to work. And the reason a democracy gets stressed, or a reason a democracy fails, at least in the case of one like the United States, where it's like pretty robust, is lack of engagement. So that's the way you fix these things. And something we've been talking about a lot is the idea that, like people talk about these systems being broken, and it's like, cool, let's rephrase broken to deeply stressed, and we need to unstress them, and we unstress them by people getting involved and people understanding that they're part of a constituency and they need to let their voice be heard as part of that constituency. And that's how we unstress them from these corporations and, this hogwash that's going on out there.
It's interesting that, certainly in the UK where I come from, and we'll get back to mountaineering in a second before I take us deeper into the bottom of the rabbit hole. But in the UK, there's not a lot wrong with the systems. They're not even that far stretched. They're actually mostly unused. There is a system to call your elected representative. There is. And yet I bet it's not at 120% capacity. I bet there's still lots of flex in that. And so I don't think there's problems with the systems. I think it's problems with people choosing to engage with them or not. Yeah,
that's fair. And I should warn you, I actually have to jump off in 10 minutes. So
oh my word.
Maybe we should talk about climbing.
Let's talk about climbing. Sorry, it was a rabbit hole. I love rabbit holes like that.
My friend, I love digging in. I'm with you. And I'll happily jump back on here and chat more at length. Once we get through this current horse shit, I think that hopefully we have some pretty exciting politics to talk about in the United States. But
cool. But we'll have a rematch because you've got 10 minutes. What I really want to know is getting back to climbing. You've climbed all over the world. What's the favorite climb? What's the one that you're like, oh?
I mean, the easy choice is this climb Link Sar that we just did. And we won the gold medal, which is great. And it was a totally bitchin' climb, which is great. But the team that we had for the objective was basically 4 guys, 2 of whom were in their 30s, me and Chris Wright, and 2 of them who were in their 60s, Mark and Steve. And it was really cool because this climb required a lot of logistical finagling. The strategy required for the climb itself was very complex and required a lot of experience. The technical climbing was hard, and the climb itself was huge. So it really required that like young man technical prowess strength to actually do the climbing. But then Chris and I really had to lean hard into Mark and Steve for their, collective, like, I think collectively they've been on like 60 or 70 expeditions. So the amount of experience they had for like how to get at a 10,000 foot mountain face on a 23,000 foot peak, was immense. So it was like this really amazing kind of culmination of all of those things coming together. And then it required 2, full summers in the Karakoram to get the thing done.
Wow.
So that one was pretty special. And I think it really demonstrates for me what I care about in climbing, which goes far beyond the like getting to the top or the hardest move or whatever. For me, climbing is this very holistic thing where you have these amazing partnerships, you have these relationships with communities, you have these massive levels of strategy and logistics that all go into it. And we always just talk about like the 6 days en route or 9 days en route. But for me, it's, Linksar was a project that, the climb took 9 days up and down, but it really took like 3 years of planning and training and negotiating and waiting and all of that stuff. And I just love all that stuff. And that climb required all of it.
It's interesting. I've got Dane Jackson, who's a pretty special whitewater kayaker, coming on for the interview in an interview for a few weeks' time. And last year he did a massive waterfall in a kayak in Chile. Huge, like the second highest. I think it was 140 feet or something like that. I mean, it's just falling off in a kayak. And it took him seconds to do. And yet he's been looking at this since his first trip to Chile 10 years ago, going, one day it'll be the perfect conditions. One day it'll be the perfect conditions. There's a lot more time, patience, and planning involved with this than just putting on the boots and deciding to lift your hand up and start.
Totally. Yeah. And it's like that's the thing about climbing for me. And I think it's true with a lot of these things is, and really, I think it's true of anything we want to do well is, we talk about these things as sports. And I think that when we talk about sports, that oftentimes just zeroes us in on like that little time where we're going up the climb or we're flying off the waterfall or whatever. But when I think about climbing for myself and when I kind of advise people on how to think about it for themselves, I think of it like a practice. It's something more like a martial art or more like, like an art where it's something that we invest time in over and over again in order to get better, to learn more, to progress. And it's not something that is only about the summits. It's something that is about the process. And that's I think the best way to achieve. I think it's the best way to stay alive. And it's the best way to like make it so that, the fact that we were on top of Linksar for like 10 minutes, which is a pretty tiny amount of time compared to 3 years invested in a project, but, it's would not really seem worth it. But if you're invested in the whole process, then it's all worth it, even if you don't make it to the top.
That's it. What quickly, but because we don't have long left, and I want to rebook you for something else because we could have some more great conversations. What's the one that got away?
Ooh, what's the one that got away? Huh? You know what? I haven't been asked that in a long, long time. I don't know. I think I'm still young enough that it hasn't gotten away yet. Maybe I'll be able to answer that question in like 15 years, but I'm still fighting for them.
What's the one that you're like, I haven't done it yet, but it keeps bugging you that you just want to go do it?
Yeah, I think that for me, a lot of it is kind of defining what I can do best. And it's so part of looking at your climbing is looking at what your weaknesses are that you need to train, but it's also leaning into your strengths. And that's something I've been working on a lot. And like with kind of some of the upcoming objectives, I've done a lot of kind of personal sort of meditations on like, what do I want and where does that intersect with what can I do best? And that's a very fun thing to work on. And the upcoming objective, which I'll kind of drive us away from, but next summer we're going back to Pakistan. And I think the upcoming thing I think is a very exciting kind of culmination of all of those things. And I'll be very excited to talk to you about it once we go give it a whirl.
I can't wait. So Graham, as we've got a few minutes left, I've got one final question. And
cool.
People out there they love their gear. They love spending money on gear. But what's Graham's one piece of gear you just can't leave home without?
Well, let's see. There are very specific answers that my sponsors would love for me to lay into. In terms of like gear, it's all about the places where you interface with the medium. When we talk about jackets, they're great. When we talk about pants, they're great. But like your gloves and your ice tools and your boots and your crampons, those are the places where you actually touch the mountain. And so those are the things I probably focus the most on. But I would say that probably one of my most important pieces of gear is actually my eye mask, because sleeping is such an important component to all of this. And being able, like, while you're traveling in these like crazy travel sequences, while you're in these like wacky base camps and the wind's howling, man, you got to be able to sleep well. Otherwise you will not perform. And so the one thing that I feel like is, doesn't matter if I'm going on a work trip, doesn't matter if I'm at home, doesn't matter if I'm on an expedition, like I do not go anywhere without my sleeping mask and some like either earbuds or earplugs or whatever, because that's the answer that I feel like everybody always wants me to sit around and talk about, like, well, my favorite carabiner is, which I can talk about for as long as you want, but sleep and having the tools in order to sleep well are hyper important.
It's very, very interesting that mine is my Thermarest and I've got a pair of custom made what they call earplugs. And they're custom, they fit me perfectly because I've got dodgy ears from too much kayaking. And those two things and sleep, that makes or breaks every expedition I ever go on. No sleep makes for a really bad performance the following day.
Yep, I get it. That's I mean, whether you're talking about trying to write an essay or climb a mountain or whatever, sleep is clutch. I'm psyched to hear you're on the same program.
Yeah. Cool. So listen, Graham, I want to let you go and get off to the rest of your day. And I just want to thank you for showing the rest of the world what's possible and leading the way for us to follow. So thank you so much for that. People need more Grahams. Folks should go and check you out, grahamzimmerman.com. Is that right?
Yep. Yeah. My website, and then kind of Instagram is the primary social tool I use. And I'll encourage folks to reach out, if you have specific questions about policy or calling your reps or climbing or whatever, reach out. I always try to make myself available to folks because we're all in this together and community is important.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Graham. I'll get Kat, who works with me, to reach out for a round 2 rematch at some point in time in the next, maybe the end of this year or something. But good luck with what's next. And I can't wait to see the photos.
Hey, my friend, I've really enjoyed this chat. Thank you for doing what you do, and thanks for asking great questions. It's fun.
Cheers, bud. Stay awesome, hey?
Hey, likewise. Be well, my friend, and I can't wait to talk again soon.
Bye-bye.